Judging by my 3 most popular videos, I'm pretty sure most of my audience is aware of Danganronpa. It's a murder mystery franchise, and when first playing the game, I felt like it handled character deaths in the most heartbreaking way possible. A year later, and I couldn't have been more wrong. Enter Your Turn to Die, not murder, but people still die, mystery game that gets compared to Danganronpa way too much. While I could say a lot about this franchise, such as its nods to the retro games that inspired the VN genre and its intriguing characters, what I want to talk about today is the way it handles its character deaths, which is one of the most unique and, excuse the pun, well executed I've seen in a video game since. Usually in video games like this, while you are capable of making choices in them, the death of the characters is always out of your control, and you as a player know that. So while you may feel a great deal of sadness when a character dies, you come to the understanding that the character is gonna die no matter what, so you eventually move on. However, Your Turn to Die increases the player's ability to make choices to the point where they can actually influence certain characters' deaths. This causes the player to not only feel guilt over the character's passing, but also grief knowing that they had a part in their death. In this video, I'll be going over exactly how Your Turn to Die is able to do what other games could not, and make the character feel truly responsible for their own actions. One other aspect of Your Turn to Die is that, unlike most other games, your actions can determine whether certain characters get to live or not, such as with Reko and Alice, or So and Kana. Because of this, most would assume the reason why players feel so much guilt when a character dies is simply because of that. However, that's only a small fraction as to why Your Turn to Die is so effective. In fact, a grand majority of the game, including the entirety of Chapter 1, your choices don't actually matter, but that's not the point. The reason why Your Turn to Die is so effective at making you feel guilt over these deaths isn't because you have a choice, it's because you think you have a choice, and the game takes full advantage of that. Here's the thing though, doing that is really difficult to pull off. Many games have actually tried to pull this stunt, but almost always fail because the audience knows their choice ultimately doesn't matter. So how is Your Turn to Die able to do something that most games just cannot? It all has to do with audience conditioning. Conditioning, or classic conditioning in this case, is the repeated process of pairing a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned one to the point that, eventually, when you perceive the conditioned stimulus, it automatically associates it with the unconditioned one. A classic example of classical conditioning is Ivan Pavlov's dog bell experiment. In it, a bell was rung whenever a dog was served a meal. Obviously, the dog drooled at the sight of food, because, well, it's a dog, what do you expect? However, because a bell was rung whenever the dog drooled, the dog associates its drooling with the sound of the bell, and eventually, the dog drooled whenever the bell was rung, even when food wasn't present. In this case, the bell was the conditioned stimulus, and the drooling was the unconditioned stimulus. In Your Turn to Die, the conditioned stimuli are the choices you face throughout the game, and whether you make a choice, you receive some sort of consequence, the unconditioned stimulus. So whenever a consequence occurs, you automatically assume it's because you made the wrong choice. This conditioning starts as soon as the game starts, with you voting off one of 2 stick people, causing one of them to die. Right off the bat you were given a choice, and you received a consequence for your actions, setting up for what's to come. Throughout the entirety of Chapter 1, you're given multiple choices similar to the initial one, such as the first discussion, the first trial with Joe, and the Russian roulette minigame, among other things. Although these choices don't really matter that much in the long run, they're not meant to. The purpose of these scenes is to give a player a sense of agency and an active role rather than a passive one. Doing this conditions the player into believing they actually have more freedom in their actions than they actually do, even if it's just by a little bit. This all builds up to the 2 most tragic moments in the chapter, that being the deaths of Mishima, Kai, and Joe. What makes Mishima's death so tragic and shocking is that, unlike in the main game, you don't exactly know who's gonna die until it's too late. This causes the player to think back and wonder if Mishima's death could be prevented somehow if they voted for someone else. Even if the player didn't vote for Mishima, they could try to vote for the character with the second highest amount of votes and attempt to get a tie. This is something that somewhat gets lost in the first trial, but thankfully gets replaced with having the ability to pick who dies in later trials. Speaking of which, despite being the one the player actually votes off, I feel like the players feel a lower amount of guilt towards Kai's death than they do Joe's, someone whose death is completely out of their control. At first glance, this doesn't seem like a lot of sense, but Your Turn to Die uses a lot of clever tricks in order to make the player feel this way. Unlike the other deaths, Kai's has a rather uplifting tone to it. By reclaiming his own demise and cutting himself rather than being executed, he tells the survivors that they can be able to resist against the masterminds one step at a time. This, combined with the fact that Kai is at least somewhat prepared for his death, soothes the audience into accepting his loss. In contrast, the writers go out of their way to not only make players feel distressed over Joe's death, but also for them to feel guilty over it. For one, Joe is a lot closer to you as a player than Kai is, making his death a lot more influential. Also, unlike with Kai, who was voted off after everyone has come to a reasonable conclusion, Joe was going to die no matter what, all because of a series of unfortunate events. This makes Joe's death feel infinitely more unjustified, as is the main reason as to why the sacrifice rule even exists. However, this supposedly presents a contradiction in my theory. If Joe's death is to be completely out of the player's control, both externally through gameplay and internally in the story, how on earth will the player feel guilty over it? Well, Your Turn to Die is able to do just that in what is one of the most genius combinations of story and gameplay that I have ever seen. Before Joe gets executed, Sue Miley gives Sarah a device that could potentially save Joe's life. It's a button that, if pressed enough, could potentially stop the machines from happening, and Joe could be saved. But it is not Sarah who actually presses the button or not, it's you, the player, who controls Joe's fate. This moment, this very moment, is what all of your gameplay and subconscious conditioning in Chapter 1 leads up to. You are already given the information that Joe is going to die because he is a sacrifice, leaving you at a state of rock bottom emotionally. So when you are given the chance to actually change the situation around you, you take it. After all, with how much the game conditions you into actually believing you have agency and that your actions have consequence, even if you doubt that chance, pressing the button seemingly brings zero downsides, and you'd rather try and fail to save Joe than just leave him to die. However, not only did your attempt to save Joe fail, something that seems rather obvious in hindsight, but Sue Miley informs you that all that button pressing you did, in a desperate attempt to keep Joe from dying, only made him suffer longer. With just a simple minigame, Your Turn to Die was able to take Joe's death, something that should have been no one's fault, and made you partially accountable for it. Doing this allows Joe's execution to utilize both the feeling of helplessness in a situation that you cannot change, while also the feeling of guilt in a situation that you directly caused without contradicting itself. This is something that I've never seen a video game do before. Heck, I haven't seen a video game actually make me feel this accountable in anything before. So for Your Turn to Die to not only achieve that, but to go above and beyond is absolutely insane. But you know what's even more insane? We have only scratched the surface of how Your Turn to Die can play with your sense of freedom as a character. These next chapters are going to be even crazier from here on out. Chapter 2 begins with Sarah having reoccurring hallucinations with Joe, which brings me on to my next point. The way the player reacts to Kai and Joe's death is further represented even after their deaths. Kai's hopeful legacy not only lives out through his laptop, which helps the cast out a number of times, but also through Q-taro, who is inspired by Kai's actions to become better. In contrast, Joe's death manifests itself into horrifying hallucinations that torment Sarah so badly that, one of the roots, her mind forced herself to forget about Joe completely. These hallucinations also repeat the idea that Sarah was responsible for Joe's suffering, making the player feel even guiltier. After these hallucinations, we get into our next example of Your Turn to Die conditioning its players into believing their choices matter, the Trust Barter game. In it, you get to play a series of minigames with a character of your choice to receive clear chips for the both of you. Clear chips are important because if someone does not obtain a certain amount of them by the end of the coin game, they will die. In addition to this, each player starts with 50 me tokens that are specifically unique to them. You cannot do anything with your own me tokens, but you can use other people's me tokens for several goodies, such as clear chips, videos of people dying, and your favorite character's special little secrets. Ooh. However, you are also told that you shouldn't run out of me tokens, as something bad might happen. This game is a prime example of how Your Turn to Die makes you believe that the things that happen in the game happen due to your individual choices, and that all it has to do with the concept of misdirection. If you're ever into magic tricks, or played Apollo Justice, you've probably already heard of this term, but basically, misdirection is when something is put into the spotlight for the audience to focus on, while something else happens in the background. The player is so focused on playing the games with their very characters to make sure they don't die, getting enough tokens to get info inside characters, and making sure they have enough tokens for themselves to live before they think about who will die next, because they think that what's listed above will determine the latter. This misdirection not only distracts you from predicting who will die next, but it also distracts you from the fact that this game is blatantly withholding information from you. If you didn't know, it's impossible to get information for Kana, Keiji, So, or Alice. However, it'd be impossible for you to tell because the game never gives you enough of their Mii tokens to find out. So, when the information about these characters is withholded from you while others aren't, you simply assume that you just don't have enough Mii tokens, which is brilliant. This misdirection continues even after the game, as either Q-taro or Jin are set to die while everyone else watches. Even though it might shatter your suspension of disbelief when it comes to you deciding their characters' fates, it makes a lot of sense in hindsight, and it doesn't feel too off. Throughout the Trust Barter game, you see Jin giving away his Mii tokens for free at minimal cost, and you see Q-taro ask for very large amounts of your Mii tokens multiple times. Even if your sense of immersion is broken by the scene, the following more than makes up for it. It seems like Q-taro or Jin's death is inevitable, but there is one way to save the both of them, and you and Sarah have to figure that out with a decision sequence, similar to the ones in the voting game. This one scene is not only really thought out, but the best scene in the entire game, because it takes everything we've talked about so far and crams it into one powerful scene. Unlike previous discussions, this one actually has some sort of a time limit, in that if you don't solve the puzzle in a set amount of turns, the needle will hit, and Jin or Q-taro will die. Already, this gives players the incentive to think more carefully about how they will be spending their turns, but there's something else that further convinces people who aren't that good at the game, people like me. If you spend too many times trying to solve the puzzle, the needle actually strikes Jin, but you don't automatically lose the game. There's still a chance to save Jin, but you have to worry quick, as while the poison is acting relatively slowly, it still is very painful. Just hearing Jin squealing in pain between turns really made me go from taking this puzzle seriously to trying my absolute best to beat the puzzle as best as I can in the shortest amount of turns. Speaking of Jin, there's another element that makes this scene amazing. If you didn't know, Jin and Q-taro are suspended on a disc on opposite ends. Currently the needle is facing Jin, but Q-taro has the option to flip the disc and take the needle instead. The only thing now is, will he do it? Just like with the Mii tokens, players are so focused on saving Jin and Q-taro that they don't even consider the real potential victims, the Yabasame siblings. This is yet another example of Virtua to Die using misdirection to impact its players. At the end of the puzzle, you realize that the only way to save Jin and Q-taro is to push Reko, who turns out to just be a doll, to her death. However, even though she's not the real thing, this doll Reko still has hopes, aspirations, and dreams, just like anyone else. So, do you spare this doll Reko and risk Jin and Q-taro's lives? Or do you sacrifice her to save the other two? This would already be distressing enough for the average player, but as Virtua to Die always does, it takes one step further. Just like with the Joe incident, you don't just choose to push Reko off a ledge or not. When you decide to push off Reko, you manually have to click on her multiple times in order to shove her little by little, and every single push you do, Reko begs you to stop. Again, having the player manually push Reko off through gameplay makes the player feel a lot more accountable for her death than, say, watching a cutscene of Sarah pushing Reko off at the ledge because, in a way, Sarah isn't the one who killed Reko. You are. You keep on pushing her until she's at the very edge, and before you do the final blow that knocks Reko off the ledge, now does it for you because she can't bear to see you take another burden of guilt on yourself. When I say that Your Turn to Die contains the illusion of player agency, you might assume that I'm insulting it because I'm implying that the game thinks it has agency when it really doesn't. And well, I kind of am saying that, but certainly not as an insult. I say it has the illusion of agency the same way a magician is able to create illusions. These illusions are excellently crafted and make the player truly feel like they're the ones in control, the same way an illusionist is perfectly able to make their magic look like it's really happening. I think it's about time to talk about the first major diversion in the story depending on the player's behavior, that being the death of either the real Reko or her brother Alice. What I really enjoy about this aspect of the game is that you don't directly choose who gets to live or die. Rather, your actions prior to this event have natural consequences. If you happen to push the fake Reko to her death, ironically, Alice is the one to die, and the real Reko gets to live. Vice versa if you choose to spare the fake. It shows that even when your choices in the game lead to vastly different results, those results won't always be the ones you want, and you just have to live with that and try to do better. For example, I actually prefer Alice over Reko, but I got the Reko route because I felt like the lives of Q-taro and Jin mattered more than that of the doll Reko. Another thing I really like about this diversion, and something that I found very clever about it, is that both Alice and Reko's deaths happened very coincidentally. Alice died because he instinctively caught what he thought was the severed head of his sister, only for it to explode on him, and he dies right before Reko was able to see him again. Conversely, if the doll Reko lives, Rio Ranger, an authority of the death game, states that only one Reko gets to live. This causes the fake to kill real Reko, only to realize that she was going to die anyway. Both these incidents could have been so easily avoided, making the player think about replaying the game for a different route. If only Alice didn't catch the head. If only the doll Reko accepted her death. If only I pushed or didn't push the doll Reko to her death. So when the player goes to the other route in order to see a better ending, they will be even more disheartened to see the other sibling's death was just as unfortunate. One more thing to mention before we move on to the second main game is that if you help Reko find her bongos earlier in the game, she and Alice will actually get to have a brief reunion before she dies in the Reko route. Again, this really goes to show that even the smallest of the player's actions can have some consequences, and in this case, that's not always a bad thing. So be nice and make sure to give others a helping hand in need. You never know what will happen. So the second main game has started. Reko or Alice has gotten a cool new sprite to show how awesome they are, and we come across a little predicament as we reach the final voting time. You see, the sage of the game, Q-taro, didn't make it to the finals, meaning you're stuck to vote between either So or Kana. You can't try voting for someone else because the only other option is a sacrifice, now, and if you vote for her, she'll win the vote and cause everyone else to die. No, this has been what the entire game has been building up to, being able to choose who gets to live and who gets to die. Both of these endings are unfortunate, and there's also a third option in which you can vote for the sacrifice, so you'd expect me to really praise this part, right? Well, I really love to, but there's a massive glaring issue with this scene that I am shocked was even added in such a wonderful game as this. Take a look at the voting screen. Notice how I mentioned 3 options, but there are 4 buttons. What about Keiji? Well, here's what happens. They physically prevent you from even pressing the Keiji button, which goes against everything the game stands for. Unused usually does such a good job at hiding the fact that the player isn't actually in control, and even uses really clever means to prevent users from accessing things the game doesn't want you to access. So why is it now doing the old, "You can't do this even though we give you the option to"? Which is one of the easiest ways to break a player's immersion, and for a game like Your Turn to Die, that is very bad. Now, you might say that since Keiichi is the Keymaster, Sarah shouldn't vote for him because everyone dies if the Keymaster wins the vote, but that's the reason why you shouldn't vote for Keiichi, not a reason why you can't. Besides, players have a pretty good reason why they should vote for Keiichi too. The problem here is that So and Kana each have 3 votes, so you'd either have to pick one or the other, and if you vote now, resulting in a 3-way tie, and you tie with either the Keymaster or the Sacrifice, they win the vote, and everyone else dies. If you, and only you, vote for Keiji, Kana and So will result in a tie, and when 2 commoners result in a tie, neither of them die, meaning the only person who would die in this situation would be Now, and she would die anyway since she's a sacrifice. Now, I understand why Nankadai wouldn't allow this to happen. It's just too good of an ending for a game like this. And to that I say, who said it had to be a good ending? Here's what I would do differently. What? I thought no one voted for Keiji. How could this be? You freeze up. It's hard for you to look at your fellow participants during such a distressing time, but once you do, you can already tell which other 2 people voted for the Keymaster. They both have the same mortified and guilty expression that you must be having right now.
God damn it! Why now? I just wanted to save everyone. Meow. I just couldn't choose between Bucket Girl or the loner. Woof.
So and Q-taro are visibly pissed, and rightfully so. I mean, because of you, all of them are gonna die.
You know the rules! Everyone would die if the Keymaster wins. Voting for him should have been the goddamn option.
Hey, Sarah! Was it really that fucking hard to vote for me, huh?
You see that Kana is crying on the floor, crying her eyes out. It sounds like she's trying to say something, but the words just can't come out. Next to Kana is now, who's silently comforting her. As the sacrifice, she has already accepted her fate faster than the others, but still is just as emotionally shattered. Amidst all the chaos happening in front of you, you turn to look at Keiji, who is also watching the discourse. Surprisingly enough, he seems rather calm, and is definitely taking the situation the best, which is ironic since, as the Keymaster, he was the one who was voted for.
Welp, didn't expect this to happen. I really didn't expect for you of all people to be the one voting for me. Don't worry, I get why you did it. You're pretty smart. If the other two didn't lie, you would have actually made it.
Keiji then leans close to you and looks you directly in the eye.
Hey Sarah, don't you think it's kinda ironic that trying to save everyone only led to everyone's deaths?
Although he's trying to make light of such a dire situation, in your final moments, you can tell by his face that he's mortified at the ever-approaching inevitable. And just like that, you, as well as everyone else you've been with throughout this sadistic game, died instantly. Okay, yeah, so it's pretty cheap that Jin and Reko, or Alice, just so happen to vote for Keiji only when you do, but hey, at least it gives you an option to vote for Keiji, and that's now an official reason why you can't vote for him. Oh, hey guys, so while I was editing this video, I encountered something. Turns out that there actually was an unused scene with you voting for Keiji, and it's actually quite different from mine, and to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know how to feel about it. So let me read it for you. I'll just read it to you. Sarah-chan, this voice is...
I'm sorry. It's impossible after all. I can't decide something like this. I can't take the responsibility.
What happens in this situation? So and Kana are tied for first place with 3 votes each.
And then, since first place does not include the sacrifice, a deciding battle, in other words, the ones who voted for Keiji and now, just Sarah-san and Nao-san, re-vote for either So and Kana, please. That means, since I only have 2 votes, it's basically my decision, isn't it? Please submit your complaints to Sarah-san. Sarah-chan, how could you? I'm going to die, and you're going to tell me to take all the onus and sink. This is too cowardly. Because I can't stand it anymore. I'm sorry, Nao-san. It's fine this way.
And yeah, that's basically what happens. So basically what happened is that Sumaili comes out of nowhere and basically tells Sarah and now the people who died to just re-vote again for So and Kana. And since Now has 2 votes, then basically means they just force Now to either vote for So and Kana. I don't honestly, it kinda just feels like a more intricate way of what happened in the game, and it just doesn't really make all that much sense, to be honest. For one, didn't Sumaili herself say that if 2 people that aren't the sacrifice or the Keymaster die, that they get to live? That's what she said. So why is she just now contradicting it when it's convenient for her? Also, why is Sumaili even here? It was Tia Savalan and Gashu who were doing chapter 2, not Sumaili. She was down in the first floor doing whatever she was doing. I kinda don't know what she was doing. But still, it just kind of feels like they pulled this out of nowhere, and it was really cheap. But then again, my ending where where Jin and one of the Abasames just happens to vote for Keiji, but only when you vote for Keiji is pretty cheap. But which one is more cheap? I don't really know. Tell us in the comments. Now, despite my little tangent about being unable to vote for Keiji, I still think that this part of the game is really good. Again, the fact that you can even let the sacrifice win as a bad ending is a really nice touch. But I want to talk more about the other two endings, So and Kana. What I really like about this diversion is that not only does it change who gets to live, it also changes the overall tone of the game. If you let So live, the game becomes a lot darker. Sarah gets so traumatized that she forgets who Joe is, and So will never forgive you for killing Kana. In contrast, if you let Kana live, the game becomes surprisingly more lighthearted. Sarah gets to reconcile with an AI Joe, and Kana is on good terms with her. This also applies to Reko and Alice to a lesser extent. This shows that your actions have direct consequences that are more than just the superficial. So even when you are given a direct choice on who gets to live or die, you still need to think about what is morally right in order to get the most satisfying route. Even when your favorite character gets to live, there could still be some element to the story that you wish you could undo. So I've finally gotten to the point where you can directly choose who lives and who dies. This seems like the final step you can go when it comes to a concept like this. Surely you'd think you'd reach the peak, but somehow, someway, Your Turn to Die manages to outdo itself in Chapter 3. Meet the dummies. These guys were your former teammates in the death game that didn't make out in the first trial, and will be assisting you all in this one. Just like the main cast, each of the dolls have their own funny quirks and lovable personalities. It would be a shame if something bad happens to them. On a completely unrelated note, your task this time around is to solve a series of life-threatening puzzles and defeat monsters called obstructors. Just like with the puzzle in Chapter 2, you have to think carefully and solve the puzzle fast before danger arrives. But while Chapter 2's danger is merely perceived, Chapter 3's danger is very, very real. These obstructors are in it for the kill, and if you waste too much time trying to solve the puzzle, it will kill one of your dummies, starting with either Hayasaka or Anzu. When these characters die, they die for real this time, meaning that you have to be really good at solving these puzzles if you want your friends to live, especially if you are fond of these two characters. This really shows how Your Turn to Die makes your actions have consequences. Even things you do on accident will creep up to you in the future in a way that you don't expect, whether it be better or for worse. I think it's best that we end this video on the art style. Its bright colors not only represent the unreal, bizarre tone of the death game, but it also reminds me of pop art, which, while originated in America, has influenced Japan as well, with artists like Yayoi Kazuma and Tadanori Yoko. One of the main messages of pop art is that anything could be art, and I feel like this represents Your Turn to Die perfectly. People have been wondering if video games count as art or not, and Your Turn to Die is a wonderful example of the unique capabilities video games have in the artistic world. I've played many games that resonated with me personally, but Your Turn to Die is the only game I've played whose gameplay directly builds onto its story to make it even more powerful. Hello there. So, I wanted to end this. I kinda wanted to end this video on. So, I'm kinda doing a little unscripted bit just to, talk with you guys and end this video on something that isn't flat, Anyway, I'm really proud of this video. It's probably the biggest project I've done since the ranking Danganronpa characters. I even got voice actors to work on this, and to all the voice actors who work with me with this, thank you so much. Your voices are incredibly talented, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. So, thank you. I've put the names and the voice actors right here, so please make sure to check them out. They're great. Also, I really would appreciate it if you liked on this video, commented it, and subscribed, because I'm kind of just a hobbyist. I'm not paid to do these videos or anything. I'm just doing them in my free time, and what fuels me to make these videos isn't money or advertisements. It's the comments you give me and the amount of support you guys get me. So, thank you very much. I wouldn't have been able to make it this far. The fact that I'm even over 5,000 subscribers, that's really great, thank you. I'm probably gonna take a break for a little bit, but I promise I'll make quality content for all of you. So, please stick around, and I love you guys. See you later.